I think one of the things about this type of technology, energy tech, that I have a strong stance on is like, you know, people need to be able to generate their energy locally. We have to break this centralized system down and get this down to the level of the community or the home. And in order to do that, it has to be cost effective, right? And so what Malcolm's done is nothing short of genius, and I would say his model is equally genius. But what I learned about the thunderstorm generator is so far it hasn't really increased the fuel efficiency of a generator to the degree where it would be a tenable solution for powering your home, for example. Like I did some calculations on based on like see, it's funny they won't even talk about it. Like they've kept the focus a lot on like this is going to clean up the atmosphere. This has this transmutation effect, which is incredibly interesting. Don't get me wrong, but I remember having kind of a little comment discussion in one of the YouTube videos. I think it was on Martin Fleischman Project YouTube channel, and I said, "Listen, like that's great and all, but we need solutions that are going to be cost effective." And someone was like, "This is about cleaning up the atmosphere." I'm like, if people can't power their homes, if they can't provide energy for their families, I'm like, none of that other stuff matters. Plus, there isn't even a good argument to be made that man-made pollution, let's say, is having any sort of real, what I would call real impact on the globe. There's people like Alex Epstein, who's written a book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and he lays out like a fantastic argument for why really we should be using more fossil fuels, not less. And there's not really, there's people don't do true cost benefit analysis anymore because I've talked to people about this. And actually, I credit Alex with this, is that, when you're comparing possible solutions or alternatives, a lot of times what happens is the media does this really subtle thing where they say, oh, here's all the positives of this one potential approach, and then here's all the negatives of the other. But we're missing half the equation, right? Like we're not talking about the negatives of the current approach and the positives of the alternative. So they set it up that way intentionally. And so, yeah, with Malcolm's tech, I mean, it's so first off, it's 0 point. It's really what's happening in the thunderstorm generator is 0 point technology, but it's not sophisticated yet. It's almost like, this is like almost going backwards a little bit in the sense of like, not caveman tech, but it's going backwards because we are almost having to start over where Tesla and some of these others, started from. And so that toroidal effect that's happening, the vortex effect that's happening in the thunderstorm generator of opposing hot and cold ionized air, exhaust and ionized air, is creating a 0 point within that. And that creates what I understand is like a scalar or like a horizontal plane outward. And it's at that point at which these elements have this low power nuclear reaction. It's basically, the transferring of electrons and protons from one thing to another, kind of stepping up or stepping down, which gets you that, that clean exhaust where you're getting like 20% oxygen is what they've been seeing. Basically the removal of carbon dioxide and monoxide. So it's 0 point, and that's what's really exciting to me.
And
Yeah.
because it's low powered, is that why it's not as fuel efficient as we think it? Well, as we thought it would be.
No, the low power refers to like comparative to the other ways we know how to do fusion and fission and nuclear reactions. Those are implicitly high powered things in large part because they're explosive. And what Malcolm's tech is actually implosive. So there's, I, I told you guys already that I'm interested in the esoteric, and I think if anyone were to go look at Malcolm's plasmoid unification model, I actually have a bunch of stuff saved, and I don't think you guys have done too much with screen sharing. But if at some point you want to see some of this stuff, I'd be happy to.
Yeah,
But
whenever you want
You
to.
go ahead and yeah, share whenever you feel like it.
let me just pull this up quickly. I won't keep it up for too long, but I think it's helpful to see. So this is Malcolm's plasmoid unification model, and you know, and on the topic of esotericism and whatnot, like this is that. I mean, he's really encompassing both the sort of metaphysical or the dramatic narrative that we are all embedded in, and placing that into a model that also meets up with the physical realm. And so, you'll notice things like the why is this so low? There's a higher quality one, so I apologize that this is a little pixely. But you get this off his site on strikefoundation.org. But you can see like the zodiac signs here. We've got periods of time. Everything is cyclical. Everything is a fractal, and you've got the elemental table here within this. So he really is, and that is what in part why 0 point energy is going to be a fundamental part of this shift that humanity is going to go through, is because it's going to be us recognizing that this material world we live in is tightly tied to some of these more esoteric things. There is a narrative that we're embedded in. So, I think this is fantastic work on his part. And a lot of it is numerology, sacred geometry. So these are topics that I've been quite interested in. So anyways, getting back to 0 point, what his solution, the thunderstorm generator, is doing is basically like a first pass at 0 point. And the cool thing about it is there really is no limit to its application. 0 point isn't like saying internal combustion engine. It's more like, yeah, it's more broad than that, and it can be applied in so many different ways. And I think you're going to see that. And to be fair, many people have already built these solutions, and there's almost no shortage of ways in which to utilize it. And something that I think I have some unique insight or perspective on is just how, although not exclusively, I know others have realized this and are realizing this, is just how fundamental the toroid is, the shape of the toroid. Have you guys gotten much into that on your own, or have your guests talked much about that?
Yeah, we've delved into it because it is a like for like, well, symbol wise, it is like for like to a toroid. So yeah, I mean that's what kind of excites me the most about it, that it is sacred geometry. That is the fundamental. That's the fundamentals of what he's created. So, and when you said earlier on about we're basically stripping it back to not obviously not caveman times, but whatever progressed us from caveman times, we're stripping it back to that. And I've said this before on the podcast with science. It seems to be like they go down a route and they build upon on top of each other's work. And it's such a bad sort of system because no one can then discredit anyone else because everyone's works sort of built on top of each other. So there's no way of discrediting anyone. So, and in that case, there's actually no way of wiping the slate clean and then starting again from somewhere else. And I guess that's why Malcolm Bendall gets a bit of hate from one side, because it is kind of redefining a lot of what science thinks they know today.
Yes, it absolutely is. Like if you think of it as science being this branching thing in which old knowledge is built on top of, the problem is like Malcolm is bringing you back to the trunk almost, and like science hasn't gone back to that point in a very, very long time. We've already built assumptions into our worldviews and our models that are not questioned anymore, and they're having all sorts of problems with that. If you I one of the things I like to do is I use Chrome on my phone, and it'll give you like a news feed of like things, like topics it thinks you're interested in, and they're all like normie, like mainstream media things, but they do all sorts of funny stuff with like their imagery and their titles as like clickbait. Um, but like it's just so funny to see how they sort of partially acknowledge that there's problems with our model, the standard model, but yet nobody's really interested in going back and just being like, okay, what if we didn't get it right at the beginning? I think people who are genuinely scientifically minded will always tell you, listen, science is like, it's an ever evolving thing, and um, things models are good as long as they're useful to us, but it doesn't mean they're all encompassing or perfect. And that's the right mindset. But we sometimes have to go back. And, with Malcolm's tech and 0 point in general, the reason that we haven't been able to make some of these breakthroughs in modern times, just to be clear, because I think these things have been solved for in the past, as recently as maybe 300 years ago, but almost certainly pre-Diluvian, um, 12,000, 11,900 years ago and beyond. It's probably understood then, but um, you know, this place is not a place of scarcity. We don't live in a realm of scarcity. We actually live in a realm of abundance. But we've got some of these rules baked in that, science says, the laws of entropy and thermodynamics say yada yada yada. It's like, turns out that's not correct. Like, turns out the concept of the ether is valid and was valid, and we've just turned a blind eye to it, and we stopped being curious. We've stopped being curious about what we can do. And the other thing is that people don't build and test and try stuff out anymore. And I love Malcolm for that, because it's like, you watch some of his videos, he's kind of like this, down to earth guy who's like, yeah, we're gonna rig this up, and like he's got guys there in a garage doing stuff, but like that's actual science in my mind. So yeah, we've been delayed. Stephen Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer talks has a documentary, his most recent one, called The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It. And have you guys seen that? I don't know if you watch any of his
Oh,
stuff.
but it sounds great.
Yeah, so he's mostly known for, like, in the world of ufology and whatnot, which I would like to get into at some point. But his focus right now with his most recent documentary is about the lost tech and um, this industry of confiscation of tech from people who have built solutions that would start to tear down that $1 trillion oil and energy industry. And so there have been many people who have solved some of these issues, have actually built toroidal 0 point energy solutions. Stanley Meyer is the one that comes to mind. He was based out of Washington State here in the States. He got a little bit of, local news publicity in the, I think, 90s for his car that ran on water, but that will sound familiar to you if you watch any of the stuff from Malcolm. Also, would shout out Jordan at Alchemical Science, because that's actually how I found Malcolm. Jordan seems to be just sort of a self-taught kind of guy who's going down these same paths, and he actually got to see the thunderstorm generator in person. That, but anyways, oh man, I lost my train of thought. Well, anyways, the solutions have been built, but they get confiscated, and that's what I was going to say. It's just like, that's what Dr. Greer focuses on in that documentary, is like, hey, there are a lot of people who have tried and have been successful in building solutions, and basically they all get confiscated under the name of national security, which is just like the biggest crock and crime against humanity that you could ever imagine. So yeah, I think, like, Greer's perspective is like, we got to get one of these solutions and we got to just like open source it and get it out to like the world in such a way that like it just can't be stopped. And I really hope that that's what I really think that's Malcolm's intention. He doesn't, I don't think he's like trying to become a millionaire. I think he's starting with industry, which is probably good. They've got like one of these massive versions of, have you seen that? He's got like in the UK there, they've got like
Yeah,
some
outside of
massive,
London, apparently. Yeah, I've
yeah,
not
it
seen it,
works.
but I've heard about it.
Yeah. One of the gentlemen who was like, like an engineer who was like brought in to like evaluate it and test it and stuff. He's basically, I have no idea how it's working, but like I can tell you the results of what's happening, and it's nothing short of amazing. So, but anyways, like the efficiency of the thunderstorm generator will probably get better. It's so interesting when you start to get into the engineering aspect of it, of just how closely tied to this numerology and sacred geometry things are. Like I would still like to build one, but again, I kind of backed off that because I'm like, well, I can't run my home off of it. And so until I can run my home off of it, I'm not going to go spend a bunch of time and money on it. But, like the ratio of the spheres is like 4-3-2. And the length of the generator, the long part, is 144 inches or an octave of 144, right? All of these ratios are important. All of this sacred geometry is important. And because resonance and vibration is a key element of understanding what 0 point is. And really that's, a 0 point, you could interchange 0 point and toroidal mechanics or toroidal engineering. In my mind, they're the same thing. So
Yeah. So, what exactly, for someone that has no idea about it, what exactly or how exactly does it relate to sacred geometry? Like, what is sacred geometry and how does this have any relation to it at all?
that's a good question. Well, let me start out by this because you guys talked to it was his name Duncan.
Graham Dunlop.
Graham, sorry, Graham. He, I think he went through like how it works, right, with you guys. Yeah, good. So you guys have that content already. But to me, the relationship is all matter, all reality is toroidal. And what is a toroid? A toroid is you can think of it as like a sphere, right? In your mind, you can imagine what it is, but it has counter rotating hemispheres with poles in which the motion of matter, energy, whatever, moves to the center, to the 0 point, right? And that pattern can be quantified in, I think of it best as talked as ratios. That's what geometry kind of is fundamentally, is geometry is ratios, you know. And so it turns out that matters a lot, and that there's no place within a system in which it doesn't matter. So what I think is probably the case with the thunderstorm generator is it's leveraging that in some ways, but like the internal combustion engine in and of itself doesn't. A lot of the elements of the system don't, and so that's where the room for improvement might lie. But I guess if you're asking more higher level, it's kind of a mystery. I don't know why it is that way necessarily, other than I would say that's how reality is. And so because reality is that way, there's no part of reality that is not that way. So again, the other thing about the toroid is it's implosive, right? It's counter rotating hemispheres that are moving together into a 0 point at which the scalar line comes out. And you get if you looked at it from a side view, you would get like the Celtic cross, like the north south hemispheres, and then the horizontal plane, you get the Celtic cross with the circle, right? So all sacred geometry, all symbols that have been, you know, around for a very long time. And, fundamentally, I don't know if I know the answer. It just turns out that everything is like that. And actually, let me say this, and this is kind of getting quite esoteric, but it was one of what I believe to be my original thoughts. Although, from one perspective, we don't have original thoughts. But when I think about like what have I heard other people say, I'm not sure that I've heard this perspective on it, which is duality could be seen as a toroid in some sense because we live in a dualistic dimension, let's say, worldview, and duality is equal and opposite, right? For every reaction there's not equal and opposite reaction, and if you were to try to create some sort of visual representation of duality, I think the toroid is the perfect representation, in part because it meets at the singularity, which is you. You're the consciousness in the middle. But yeah, the to me, the truth is that toroidal shape and the motion that's associated with can basically be associated with just about every level of reality. I think, for example, I think the planet is a toroid. I think all planets are toroids. I think God can be thought of as a toroid because it's Chris Langan, who's one of the people I had mentioned on my topic list, is he was just a quick thing on him. Well, first off, have you guys ever heard of Chris?
Nope.
Okay,
No.
cool. I'm glad that like one of the things that guy love is like I want to share people. This is why like with these topics I listed people, because like I want people to know about these individuals. I want them to go listen to them. But Chris Langan is a gentleman who is known for having the highest tested IQ, at least in America. It's something around 200 or north of 190. And he is he has an interesting story in life because he basically was raised in poverty, and he was really never given any chances within academia. He was just because, and primarily because he's a theist, like he believes in God. And so that kind of, at that time, when he was at that age, he was just kind of, doors were not open to him. But so he's kind of this big burly dude. He's probably in his late 60s or early 70s now, good shape. But he was a bouncer in New York City, but he's brilliant. And he was interviewed by Kurt Jamungal, who runs a channel on YouTube called Theories of Everything, which I would encourage, you guys or anyone listening to check it out. Kurt is a very humble guy. He's a great podcaster. And he interviewed Chris, and Chris talked about, his cognitive theoretical model of the universe, the CTMU, which is his unique work. And his claim to fame really ought to be that, not his IQ. But what it is he was actually the first one to really suggest like what would be called like a simulation theory. He actually was the first, but he'll never get that credit because he's not in those circles. But he's someone who's really worth looking at with this stuff. And when he talks about God, it's almost like you start with a circle, and everything that is reality is within that circle. God is the background. There's nothing behind the background. That's what God is. And so the toroid is kind of like that, where it's like all the action happens on the inside, sort of. So anyways, like I really see that as like, that's what God, you can just substitute God with reality or vice versa, but there is nothing outside of reality. There's just tiers to it. There's just, we're sort of down on a low level. We're on like a lower density, as they say. And there's all sorts of strata to it. But I think ultimately, you get something that, I don't know that you can like look at God, but like if you could, I think it looks sort of like a toroid.